I was parked in my car in front of my office, the roar of traffic mingling with the noise of a long day, when my phone rang. It was my grandmother. I smiled. At first, her calls were infrequent, but they were always warm. I answered quickly, expecting a chat about the garden or the book club she belonged to. "Mara, my dear." Her voice was soft but troubled. "How are you? Are you feeling better?" I frowned. "Are you feeling better, Grandma?" "I'm fine." "Why? What's wrong?" There was silence. A heavy silence, one of those moments when you know the next words will change something forever. "Your parents told me you were very ill. That's why you couldn't attend Garrett's wedding." The words hit me like a punch. My stomach churned, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, even though I wasn't driving anywhere. "What wedding?" The sound of her breathing filled the space between us. "Your brother's wedding, my dear, was last weekend." I stared through the windshield, my reflection strange. My brother had gotten married. The family gathered, celebrated, and took pictures while I sat in the same car, oblivious to everything around me. They told everyone I was too sick to attend. They hadn't even told me there was an occasion to attend. My grandmother's voice trembled. "Mara, you really didn't know?" I forced myself to answer, despite the tightness in my throat. "No, I didn't know anything." For a moment, silence fell between us. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the silence. Then my grandmother sighed, her voice heavy with sorrow. "I don't understand why they did it, but I thought it would be best if you knew." We said goodbye, her voice filled with a worry I couldn't soothe. The call ended. I sat there, my phone slack in my hand. The world around me hadn't changed, while my own world shattered. It wasn't just a wedding, it was confirmation of something I'd tried to ignore my whole life. That to my family, I was expendable, invisible. The steering wheel felt cold beneath my palms as I finally started the engine. My parents hadn't just excluded me. They'd lied, erased me from existence, and carried on with their lives as if I didn't exist. I drove home in a daze, the question nagging at me, demanding an answer. As I reached for the door of my empty apartment, I tossed my bag onto the sofa and sat in the silence of my apartment, the phone ringing over and over again. My brother had gotten married and no one had told me. It wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern that had been repeating itself for years. Garrett was always the center of our family. When we were kids, he played baseball, and we spent every Saturday at his games. Dad would shout from the stands as if the fate of the world depended on every pitch, while Mom would clap as if every touchdown was a miracle. My piano playing or my debates barely elicited polite acclaim. This same dysfunction persisted into adulthood. Garrett chose to study law, and suddenly the bright hope of the Callaway name. My father boasted to anyone who would listen that his son was arguing cases before professors who had trained federal judges. When I was promoted to project manager at my company, a position I had fought for years to attain, my father barely took his eyes off the sports department. Even the apartment I bought last year, my first real home, was dismissed as just a start. My mother gave it a tour once, smiling gently as she mentioned that Garrett and his fiancée were thinking about a much larger house near the river. Her affection was reserved for moments when there was an audience present, at church or social gatherings. She would introduce me with playful pride. At home, she rarely inquired about my life unless I had finally found a partner. Garrett enjoyed this. He would grin sarcastically across the dinner table whenever my father compared his successes to what he perceived as my shortcomings. Every conversation seemed to revolve around him, his issues, his vacations, his plans. I learned to downplay myself and play the role of the trusted but forgettable daughter. But as I sat alone in my apartment that night, I realized something inside me had finally broken. Their silence about Garrett's wedding wasn't just another insult. It was proof that, to them, I wasn't part of the picture. And I wasn't sure I could keep pretending. I sat on the edge of my bed, still trembling from my grandmother's call. When I opened my phone and scrolled through Instagram, something I rarely used, I felt a desperate need for proof. Maybe my grandmother was mistaken. Maybe there was a small celebration I wasn't supposed to attend. But the first picture I saw shattered that hope. Garrett paused beneath an ornate arch of white roses, his tailored suit accentuating his broad shoulders. Beside him, his bride shone in a lace gown, her veil reflecting the sunlight like spun glass. Garrett's parents proudly accompanied him down the aisle, as if it were his personal triumph. I flipped through the photos, a lump forming in my throat. Patricia was there, tears streaming down her cheeks as they exchanged vows. The reception photos showed crystal chandeliers, a ballroom filled with silk-covered round tables, and a towering cake that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. I saw familiar faces from every stage of my life. Childhood neighbors, distant cousins from 3 states, dad's golf buddies, mom's book club friends, people I hadn't seen in years. They were there, raising their glasses and smiling. And me. I was completely absent. This wasn't a small party in a small space. It was a grand spectacle. At least 100 guests, maybe more. They had gone to great lengths to invite almost everyone they knew. Everyone except me. I felt nauseous as I continued scrolling. Every scroll felt like another stab in the back. I saw Garrett on the dance floor, Patricia laughing beside him, and Harold giving a speech with a glass of champagne in his hand. Their faces were beaming with joy, devoid of any guilt, as if I hadn't been born to be among them. It wasn't forgetfulness, it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was deliberate. I put the phone down and stared into the dark room. I felt a truth heavier than anything I had ever carried. I wasn't ignored, I was erased from existence, and I wanted to know why. The drive to my parents' house turned into a series of flashes of streetlights and a surge of anger. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my fingers ached. But I didn't let up. By the time I reached their front door, I was running on pure adrenaline. I didn't even knock. I pushed open the front door as I always do, my chest burning with rage. "Mara!" My mother's voice rang out from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel. Her smile faded when she saw me. "It's not Sunday. What's wrong?" "You know exactly what's wrong," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why wasn't I invited to Garrett's wedding?" Her face paled. She opened her mouth and then closed it again as if searching for an excuse. Finally, she whispered, "We thought you didn't want a large crowd. You never liked this kind of occasion." My laughter was bitter. "Did you decide for me? Did you exclude me from my brother's wedding because you assumed I wouldn't enjoy it?" I heard my father's footsteps behind me. Harold came out of the living room, looking annoyed. I turned to him and asked, "What's all the shouting about? Tell me why I wasn't invited." He looked at my mother, then back at me, his jaw clenched. "Do you really want the truth?" I said, "Yes," and my voice was trembling but steady. He said in a dry tone, "Garrett is living his life to the fullest. He's a successful lawyer, and he'll marry a woman who suits him. If you were in his place, what would you say? You would look pathetic." The words pierced me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Gary's voice came from the top of the stairs. He descended the stairs with heavy steps, adjusting the buttons of his sleeves. "Honestly, Mara, it would have been embarrassing. Everyone knows you don't fit in with that world." Something inside me broke. "Then don't expect an invitation to my house." There was a moment of silence. Then my father laughed and shook his head. "Be serious. You'll never get married." I didn't answer him. It wasn't necessary. I turned and went out the door, their laughter following me into the night, as I promised myself that they would regret underestimating me. The night after the confrontation, I stayed awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, their words echoing in my head. Pathetic, embarrassing, never get married. The irony was almost unbearable. They knew so little about me. Yet they judged my entire worth as if they were experts on my life. They never asked about my work, never bothered to notice the long nights I spent on projects. When I was promoted to project manager last year, I celebrated alone with a glass of wine. I wanted to share the news, but when I mentioned it at the Sunday dinner table, Garrett interrupted with another of his stories, and the moment was lost. Even when I bought this apartment, my first real home, something I worked for years to be able to afford, my parents dismissed it as just a temporary place. They never went back after that first visit. They said Garrett's house was much more impressive. But what they didn't really know was Elliot. We met at university, friends in parallel programs, supporting each other through endless exams. Life separated us for a few years until I found him again at the company where I now work. He held a leadership position, elegant and self-assured. Later, I learned why. His father owned the company, a man with a prominent position on every board of directors in the city. Elliot never bossed me around. He valued hard work, respected my independence, and loved me in a way I'd never known at home. 6 months ago, he proposed to me. Since then, I've worn his ring every day, a ring my family never noticed. We kept it a secret, respecting his family's privacy and my need for peace and quiet. But when I told Elliot about the confrontation, he gripped my hand tightly and said, "Then we choose who deserves to be in our lives." His words settled inside me like an anchor, and for the first time, I felt stable enough to imagine a future without them. Once the decision was made, planning our wedding became a quiet pleasure. Elliot's mother suggested an old mansion in New England, a place with ivy-covered stone walls and gardens that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. His family offered to cover the costs, insisting that our day be beautiful without being a burden. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine myself walking down a welcoming aisle. We kept the guest list small, only 30 names. My grandmother, who has always been a guiding light in my life, my aunt and cousins, the only relatives who came unconditionally for me, and a few friends who knew me as someone worth celebrating, not as a secondary figure. It wasn't about numbers, it was about belonging. Yet the question lingered like a shadow. Should I invite my parents? The thought crossed my mind late into the night. But then I remembered their laughter, my father's voice declaring I'd never get married, and Garrett's smug smile as if my life wouldn't live up to his expectations. The pain still stung. I couldn't risk letting them taint what was supposed to be my day. Then the call came. Patricia's number appeared on my screen one evening. Despite my hesitation, I answered. Mara, she said quickly, almost breathlessly. Your grandmother mentioned something. Are you really getting married? Please tell me we're invited. We're your parents. We deserve to be there. Her words may have had an impact in the past, but now they sound hollow. I said to her in a calm tone, You made it clear to me at Garrett's wedding where I stand in this family. I won't open the door for you again, just because it suits you now. Silence fell on the other end, followed by a stifled breath. She whispered, You will regret this. I ended the call, my heart heavy, but my resolve unshaken. The wedding would take place without them, and perhaps for the first time in my life, I would be without them too. It wasn't long before the news spread. I didn't tell my parents directly, but family has a knack for spreading news faster than any headline. Within a week, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with Garrett's name. Despite my hesitation, I answered. So that's right, he said without greeting anyone. His tone was clearly cheerful. You're getting married. Where will the wedding be, Mara? A barbecue in the backyard? Or maybe at the Veterans Hall down the street? I didn't respond to his provocation, but my silence was enough. He chuckled softly and hung up, leaving the insult lingering in the room like smoke. A few days later, I overheard my parents talking when my grandmother left her phone on speaker during our call. My father was muttering in the background. Maybe she can't afford anything real. Maybe a courtroom decorated with plastic flowers. Patricia added something less harsh but no less cruel. It's embarrassing. Garrett's wedding was a big deal. Hers is going to be small. I ended the call politely, but the words stuck in my throat. For the first time since Elliot proposed, doubt crept into my heart. Would my wedding live up to expectations? Would people see it as inferior, as proof of everything my parents thought about me? That night, Elliot found me sitting at the kitchen table, aimlessly scrolling through pictures of lavish receptions. He put his hands on my shoulders and leaned closer, saying, You're thinking about her again, aren't you? I tried to deny it, but the tears in my eyes betrayed me. What if they were right? What if our day was just a pale shadow of his? Elliot raised my chin until my eyes met his. They'll never understand what we're building. Our wedding isn't just a show. It's about us. About the people who truly matter to us. That's more valuable than any ballroom or chandelier. His words gave me peace of mind. I no longer sought their approval. I was choosing something they couldn't measure or ridicule. And I knew that sooner or later they would realize how wrong they were. The village shimmered like a scene from a fairy tale book. Lanterns hung from the trees, fairy lights traced lines along the arched stone paths, and the garden stretched out in a soft glow under the evening sky. As I walked along the path, my grandmother's face was wet with tears, her smile trembling but radiant. My aunt clasped her hands together, as if she had waited her whole life to see me like this. Elliot's eyes never left mine. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as someone's daughter or sister, but as myself, worthy, loved, and chosen. As we exchanged vows, I barely noticed the guests behind us, though I could hear my cousins weeping silently. It was the kind of intimacy I had always dreamed of, but never thought I deserved. Dinner was served in the garden under dim lights. My aunt stood and gave a speech, her voice trembling as she spoke of resilience, and of how love is not measured by grand gestures, but by quiet faith. My cousins surrounded me, adjusting my dress, taking pictures, and making me laugh until my cheeks ached. I thought I would feel the pain of their absence, but there was only peace. Their chairs weren't meant to be here. Their absence wasn't a wound, it was a gift. Later, I saw the lights on phones as my cousins posted some pictures online. I didn't care. I wasn't hiding anymore. When we were alone for our first dance, I knew those pictures would go far, farther than I'd ever wanted them to. And I knew that Harold, Patricia, and Garrett would eventually see them. The wedding they said I'd never have, the life they claimed I couldn't build, unfolding without them. The morning after our wedding, I was bombarded with calls, voicemails, and texts, all from my parents and Garrett. Each message was angrier than the last. Patricia accused me of infidelity and wrote lengthy passages about how a daughter shouldn't bring shame on her family. Harold's tone was even harsher. He claimed I had humiliated them by marrying someone influential without their knowledge, and that people at the country club were already talking about it. Then the public posts began. Patricia flooded Facebook with stories portraying herself as a heartbroken mother, abandoned by her ungrateful daughter. She even wrote that Harold's heart was broken because he hadn't walked her down the aisle. Strangers and acquaintances commented sympathetically, unaware of the truth. I might have ignored it, but Elliot's father wouldn't. He summoned me to his office one evening, his face grim. "This is over now," he said. That night, he called my parents himself. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I know he told them that if they didn't stop, he would make sure everyone knew they had excluded me from Garrett's wedding. Within hours, the posts disappeared. The calls stopped. Silence finally prevailed. It only lasted a few months. Then HR passed a resume to my desk, with Garrett's name at the top. He listed me as a reference, as if our history didn't exist. I refused. 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment, his voice loud. You're my sister. You're supposed to help me. She stared at him calmly. Family is supposed to help each other. Where was that when you slammed your door in my face? His face turned red, but I didn't move. This time, he was the one who left empty-handed. The months passed quietly, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of stability in my life when I learned I was pregnant. Joy replaced the old pain I had been experiencing. At first, I told no one except my grandmother. She cried on the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Mara," she said. And I believed her. A few weeks later, a package arrived at my door. Inside were tiny knitted baby socks and a photograph of Patricia sitting in her chair with yarn in her lap. There was no letter, only the implied message, an olive branch disguised as affection. Shortly after, I saw her post online. She wrote about how incredibly happy she was to be a grandmother to her 2 children, as if history had been rewritten. Comments poured in congratulating her and praising the family's joy in front of the world. She embodied the role of a proud and loving mother. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. Maybe she meant peace. Or maybe it was just another act, another way for her to publicly declare her belonging to me while ignoring what was truly broken. The truth hit me hard. I didn't know if they were capable of changing, but I knew I wouldn't give in anymore. I wouldn't seek their approval or grant them access to my child simply because of blood ties. If they wanted to be part of this new life, they would have to prove themselves worthy. I closed my laptop and rested my hand on my slightly protruding belly. Finally, I understood what my family had failed to teach me. Blood ties bind us, but respect and love are what make us a family. And I was content with little.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दर्द भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मका तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर दर्द का असर